That's why the MPA is endorsing the presidential ticket of Donald Trump and J.D. Vance, because addressing these issues isn't political, it's truly a matter of life and death to Milwaukee. So thank you.
Thank you. Great. And please stay up here, Alex, but I also want to have Andrew Wagner come up. Andrew was just recently retired as a career law enforcement officer, but he told me his wife has already put him back to work. So, Andrew, I appreciate you being here. Thanks.
Yeah, I got it. Following the assassination of Hamas chief Ismail Haniyeh in Tehran more than a week ago, the war clouds between Iran and Israel have been steadily thickening. But this breaking piece of news that we're getting to you is perhaps the biggest indicator that war is afoot. The war clouds between the two countries have darkened. Israel has formally communicated to the United States that a large-scale attack from Iran is imminent any time now. Israel has alerted the United States to what it says will be a big attack from Iran any time, any day now. Israel and US defense ministers have had a conversation where they've shared details about their assessment of when this attack will happen. All experts believe this is the biggest signal of imminent war between Iran and Israel. I want to bring in India Today's Shivani Sharma for more on this. Shivani, Israel notifying the United States of large-scale imminent attack by Iran, which means it could happen any time now. It's been more than a week since the Hamas chief was killed in Tehran, the Iranian capital, and ever since then, there's been building suspense over when the attack will come. It seems that Israel believes that attack could be very, very near.
Shiv, this is the big update on what's been happening here in Gaza, and Iran has now prepared for a direct attack on Israel, and Israel has now apprised United States when the defense ministers of both the countries have spoken, and Israel says that Iran is ready for a big offensive. And in this regard, there are reports that are coming in that might happen anytime now, even before 15th of August. So next 24 to 48 hours, we can see a big offensive coming from Iran on Israel. Iran is prepared. That's what the reports suggest, Shiv. And not only this, Lloyd Austin, the US Defense Secretary, has already directed the forces to move towards Middle East. This includes the Abraham Lincoln, the strike group, which includes the fighter jets, the warships, and also submarines. The nuclear submarines have been moved already closer in the Middle East to retaliate if Iran just attacks Israel. And Israel is also ready. It is also internally keeping itself ready for this big offensive that might come anytime now, Shiv. So this is the big breaking update that Iran, which was wanting to avenge the killing of Haniyeh since 31st of July, now it is all set, and this big war, this big attack can happen anytime now. And it is also being said, Shiv, that this might start with attacks from Hezbollah, and later in the second phase, Iran will be joining these attacks. So this is what we see, that an imminent war is coming, impending war in Iran and Israel.
Right. Okay, stay with me, Shivani. Imminent attacks, are around the corner from Iran directly. Remember, attacks from the Hezbollah side through rockets and missiles have taken place in a limited way over the last couple of days, causing some damage to Israeli defense bases in the northern part of the country already. Could this be setting the stage, as Shivani says, for that big, large-scale attack that Israel believes will happen anytime now from Iran? We've got another piece of breaking news coming in now. And this is the big update that Shivani was telling us about. The United States is boosting defense measures for Israel in the event of a big Iranian attack that is said to be expected sometime this week or any time now. The US has speeded up the advance of a big naval force to the Gulf, to the Middle East region, in order to support Israel for whatever military requirements will be needed in the event of an Iranian strike that's taking place. The Abraham Lincoln, USS Abraham Lincoln carrier strike group has been accelerated. It is speeding towards the Gulf, but more importantly, a US cruise missile submarine called USS Georgia, or the kind of submarine that USS Georgia is now being dispatched to the Gulf. And this is very, very important because the United States never formally announces the deployment of a submarine, but now they have actually announced that they are sending a cruise missile land attack submarine to the Gulf in order to try and deter Iran from some kind of an attack on Israel. Gaurav Sawant is with me live. Gaurav and I, remember, reported from Israel extensively last year. Gaurav, this is perhaps the biggest message. The Abraham Lincoln strike group, there were two other strike groups while we were in Israel. Now, US going another step further and actually publicly declaring the deployment of a land attack submarine in the Persian Gulf is a big, big step.
This indeed is, Shiv, and this comes after Iran appears to have hardened its stance. There was some hope that Iran could be persuaded not to escalate despite Ismail Haniyeh being killed in Tehran. But look at three developments that have taken place. One, Hamas not keen on the peace talks. Both Egypt and Qatar have been pushing for that August 15 peace talks. But Hamas, after Ismail Haniyeh being killed and a hardliner, Yahya Sinwar, being made the head, is pulling out of those peace talks, or is very lukewarm to these peace talks. That's signal one. Signal two is the Hezbollah strike into northern Israel, in which multiple rockets did go and hit, they were aimed at a military base. They've fallen very close to a military base. Several rockets beat the Iron Dome system. And three is the Americans then moving the USS, Abraham Lincoln from Guam all the way up to the Mediterranean Sea, and USS Georgia with the Tomahawk cruise missiles. So that's a signal to Iran that in case Israel is targeted, there would be retaliatory strikes, or there would be action that would follow. Because do remember, Iran-backed militia have been targeting US forces and US-backed forces in Iraq and across the region. So this is where things get extremely, extremely hot, and the next 24 to 48 hours may well be very critical in this conflict, Shiv.
We've got both eyes on Israel and Iran right now. Gaurav and I will continue to report in real time what's happening in that area.
Who wants basic public safety in this country? So Kamala Harris is on a tour where she's trying to redefine her record as a tough-on-crime prosecutor. And yet, if you look at Kamala Harris's record as a prosecutor, it is the opposite of tough on crime. For example, Kamala Harris pursued a policy that would recategorize people who had committed sex crimes with minors and people who had raped unconscious victims as nonviolent crimes. And what does that mean? That means those people get out of prison earlier. That means their victims have to suffer the psychological abuse of seeing them walking around our streets sooner. And that means the police officer have a few more sickos that they have to take care of instead of being in prison where those sex offenders belong. If Kamala Harris was so tough on crime, why is she making it easier for sex offenders to get out of prison? I think the media should ask her that question. Of course, Kamala Harris refuses to answer questions, but this is important stuff. I grew up in a family where we didn't have a whole lot of money, and I was raised by a tough-as-nails grandmother who, despite the fact that we didn't always live in the easiest neighborhood, we had something that our country believed every child deserved. Whether they were rich or poor, our country believed that every child deserved public safety. And as Republicans, we don't think the government should do everything, but the things that it needs to do, it has to do well, and public safety is at the very top of the list. How can you have a country, how can you have an American dream, how can you have poor children who look to the future with optimism and hope if they can't walk down the streets of their neighborhood safely? And these police officers fight to make that a reality every single day. And Kamala Harris is making their job harder, and Donald Trump is going to make their lives easier. That's why we're going to reelect him the 47th President of the United States. So let me just offer one final observation here, because some of these issues are connected. So many of these problems are obviously linked to one another. And talking at the round table with the police officers and the sheriffs really drove that point home. So I talked to one sheriff who lives about an hour away from downtown Milwaukee. And even though he lives an hour away from downtown Milwaukee, he has Mexican drug cartel members who have been doing business, selling drugs, and harming the citizens of his community. When you hear Republicans say every state is a border state, that is not just a slogan. That is a sad reflection of the reality that we have drug cartels operating about as far north in this country as we possibly could. What a disgrace. You hear people talk about arresting illegal immigrants and how the illegal immigrants completely run away, refuse to obey the commands of law enforcement. Well, why? Why do they completely refuse to obey the commands of law enforcement? Because they got into this country in the first place under the promise that law enforcement wouldn't stop them and wouldn't enforce the law. So the border policies that we have at the southern border, they make our communities less safe, even as far north as Wisconsin. It means Mexican drug cartels operating in our communities. It means people dying of fentanyl. I talked to another police officer who talked about we have fentanyl not just in heroin and opioids and even prescription pills, or I guess non-prescription pills that are sold on the street. We've got heroin and we've got fentanyl, we've got fentanyl in our marijuana bags that our teenagers are using. And look, I'm the parent of 3 young kids. My wife is here, and I'm thrilled to have her join. We've got a 7-year-old, a 4-year-old, and a 2-year-old. We don't have to worry about this yet, but I'm certain, because kids are kids, that one day one of my kids is going to take something or do something that I don't want them to take. But I don't want that mistake to ruin their life. I want them to learn from it. I want their parents to be able to punish them. I don't want our kids to make mistakes on American streets and have it take their lives away from them. That is in some ways what this fentanyl crisis has done. Normal American teenager mistakes have become death sentences because Kamala Harris refuses to do her job. And I think it's time for all of us to say to Kamala Harris, you want a promotion? You want a promotion after your record as vice president? We think you ought to be fired, and that's exactly what we're going to do come November. Thank you all for being here. To the police officers, to the police officers, we support you. We love you. We know it's not easy to be a police officer. We know we're losing a lot of good people from the force. Some due to retirement, but some, they're just sick of all the garbage. But I'd ask you, keep at it for as long as you can. Keep doing this important work, because there are a lot of us out there who are grateful for it. And in about 6 months, your job's going to become a hell of a lot easier. God bless you guys, and thank you for having me here in Wisconsin. So, what we'll do here is we'll take a few questions from reporters before we get on our way. And what I would ask is we'll get to the national reporters if we've got time. But if you're a local Wisconsin reporter, either in the Milwaukee area or outside of it, maybe start there, raise your hand, and I'll call on you first. So we got anybody? Ma'am, in the yellow dress.
Hi there, I'm Julia Fellow with 620 WTMJ. So glad that you're here. I was just talking to the president of the Milwaukee Police Association just yesterday live. He was talking about how there's 200 openings, and then there's going to be maybe 60 to 70 more retirements that are happening. But our city can't afford to keep up with what should be, that they allow, about 1,700 officers. And when we talk about detectives, it should be about 175, he says. We're down to like about 130. Yep. And then also, on top of that, the Milwaukee County leaders are talking about the sheriff's office, that we're dealing with a huge budget deficit. How are we going to meet that budget deficit? $7.2 million in overtime he was talking about with the deputies. So we're talking about money here.
Sure.
Who's going to pay for it? And also we're trying to get people, to be recruited. So how is the Trump organization going to pay for that and support that? Because detectives, for example, we had a local situation, Sade Robinson. I don't know if you've heard about it, but it was a terrible case. She was going on a date with her boyfriend, and then she was cut up in several pieces, and it's horrible.
Ugh, it's awful.
Part of her body was found in Illinois along the lakefront. Her family's really upset. But there's only so many detectives to go around with other cases. Like we have so many carjackings that are going up. This is a real issue, but how are we going to pay for it? How is your organization going to pay for that?
So let me give you a couple answers to this question, because it is, unfortunately, this is a story that I hear all over our country. A lot of police departments can't recruit the people that they need to keep us safe, and it's only going to get worse unless we fix this problem, and Donald Trump and I promise that we are going to fix this problem. First of all, you hear from police officers, and I've heard this story today, but again, I've heard it from all over our country. A lot of the reason that it's hard to recruit police officers right now is because our leaders have attacked the police for so long that a lot of people just don't want to do police work anymore. That is the first thing that leadership needs to change. We need to make it clear that we want good people, we want good police officers, we want the very best to join the American police forces all over our country, because unless we have the best people becoming police, public safety is always going to be a fantasy and not a reality. So let's have leaders who support the work of police, not people like Kamala Harris who put the police down and make their life harder. That's number one. But second, when we talk about money, first of all, when we talk about scarce municipal resources, I know a lot of towns and municipalities are dealing with limited resources. We have to ask ourselves, why are the resources scarce in the first place? And a big part of the reason is that we are spending millions of dollars housing, sheltering, and providing medical care for people who shouldn't be here. Those are the people who have come in across Kamala Harris's wide open southern border. When you take millions of dollars that should go to our local police departments and you put it in sheltering and providing medical care for illegal aliens, it is the least in our community, the least of these in our communities who suffer the most. It is innocent children who need cops to keep their streets safe. It is innocent poor people who need municipal services to work, and they are the ones who suffer the most when you have a wide open southern border. That costs money. It costs a lot of money here in Milwaukee, and it is a big driver of scarce resources. So what I would propose is you have a federal government that supports our local police, that you get the illegal aliens out of this country, and you free up precious budgetary resources to hire some police and focus on public safety. One final point on this is, I think, to the point about making police officers' lives easier, one of the weirdest things that exists in American public policy, and I didn't realize this until a couple years ago. I was a United States Senator. I have sponsored legislation to fix this, and I know President Trump agrees with me. Police officers are actually penalized because they don't get the same access to their Social Security benefits as most American workers, because effectively the way that it works is the dollar that goes into their pension is taken out of their Social Security. So you're basically penalizing our police officers, taking away their Social Security when they want to get to retirement. I think if we stop that, it would make it easier to recruit some police officers. Do the police officers out there agree with me? Stop that double taxation of benefits. I think so. And when I talk to police, I know that's a big driver. But look, unless we stop making the business of policing in this country so miserable by having our leaders attack the police, we're always going to have a problem recruiting the right people into police work. Any more? Sir.
Senator Matt Smith from WISN TV here in Milwaukee. Coming off just of everything you just talked about, it seems like some allies of former President Trump have said in recent days he needs to focus more on policy, just like you talked about, less personal attacks. I'm curious, have you had that conversation with him, and does he need to pivot, especially when you look to swing states like Wisconsin?
I don't think the president needs to pivot, and if I told him that, I can guess what he'd say. I think that the reason that President Trump has been so successful connecting with Americans is even when they disagree with something that he might say, they know that he just is who he is, right? I'd much rather have a political candidate who I disagreed with 25% of the time, but was a real human being and was willing to speak off the cuff, than to have somebody like Kamala Harris who hides behind a teleprompter and doesn't speak to the American people directly unless she's got a script in front of her telling her exactly what to say. I think the unscripted nature of President Trump is one of the reasons why his campaign gives a pretty good insight into the kind of president that he's going to be. Now, that said, we are focusing a lot on policy. We're here in Wisconsin today talking about public safety. I was in Pennsylvania yesterday talking about veterans issues. I was in Michigan the day before talking about how we have to stop the trade and energy policies that ship all of our manufacturing jobs to China. When Donald Trump was president, 12,000 American factories opened. The previous two terms, 60,000 American factories had closed. So we are talking about the policy, and we're talking about the issues, and we're going to keep on doing that. But my only advice to my running mate is be yourself and let people see who you are, and I think he's doing that every day on the campaign trail. Anything else?
Jason Calvi with Fox 6 here in Milwaukee. Democrats are criticizing your visit here to the police union. They say, you know, your running mate is a convicted felon. They also point to January 6th. Your reaction to that?
Well, look, I think that Kamala Harris has weaponized the Department of Justice, not just against my running mate, not just against President Trump, but against a whole host of normal Americans for just exercising their First Amendment rights. I mean, not maybe the most significant scandal, but certainly a very large scandal is the Department of Justice went after a pro-life Catholic father of 7 for exercising his right to peacefully protest. The Department of Justice showed up, the Department of Justice leadership had officers show up at this guy's house and treat him like a common thug for exercising his right of First Amendment protest. And I think that every single police officer here would agree with me when they say that we want a strong Department of Justice that focuses on law enforcement. Why don't they focus on shutting down the drug traffickers at the southern border and the sex traffickers and let Americans exercise their First Amendment rights? That's not what the leadership of the Department of Justice should be focused on, but unfortunately, under Kamala Harris, it has. So I think that we are clearly the party and the movement of law enforcement. You talk to the field guys in the FBI, the people who are actually on the ground dealing with the bad guys, and they're as frustrated with their leadership as we are. We just want American leadership to empower law enforcement to enforce the laws. It's going to make us all safer if we do that. Any other local Wisconsin folks? And if not, I'll take a couple from the national pool. Okay. Sir.
Senator Vance, Chris Cameron at the New York Times, you were talking about the relationship between crime and immigration, and my question is on that issue.
Please.
In an interview when you were running for Senate in September 2021, you were speaking with Jack Murphy, and you were talking about previous waves of immigration to the United States. You said the following: you had this massive wave of primarily Italian, Irish, and German immigration, and that had its problems and that had its consequences. You pointed to these problems as being higher crime rates, ethnic enclaves, and inter-ethnic conflict. Should the United States have prescribed similar policies to what you're proposing now, including mass deportation, to deal with those issues?
Well, first of all, I also said there were a lot of benefits to that wave of immigration, but has anybody ever seen the movie Gangs of New York? That's what I'm talking about. We know that when you have these massive ethnic enclaves forming in our country, it can sometimes lead to higher crime rates. What we want is an American immigration policy that promotes assimilation, that no matter where you come from, you can become an American, but only if we have an immigration policy that promotes assimilation instead of doing things like what we've done over the last few years, which is have 20, 25 million illegal